I'm Todd Crawford,
And I'm Eric Savinsky.
and we are too cool for the comic shop.
Welcome to the spooky Halloween edition.
So we're gonna be talking about the I guess it's a quadrilogy, which I don't even know if that's a real term or if that's just something invented for that Alien
I think
box
nerd
set.
culture has made it a term.
Yeah, that's
We all
probably.
know what it means.
I feel like they just invented it for that Alien box set that include Resurrection because it was so important to include Resurrection in a box set. No family would
I,
have
I
missed out on
cannot
that one.
think of a least important movie to include in anything than Alien Resurrection, but that might have been the start of it.
But we'll be talking about the Scream series this time. Each of the films directed by Wes Craven, and three of which were mostly written by Kevin Williamson.
Right. And to get to Wes Craven, he is one of your favorite talents and directors in the film industry and history at large.
Yeah. Wes Craven directed the movie tied for my favorite film of all time, The Nightmare on Elm Street, and I enjoy a lot of his movies. That New Nightmare, of course. The Serpent and the Rainbow, I think, is one of the most underrated movies of all time, and of course, the Scream movies.
And where do the Scream movies rank for you? I mean, because they're very comedic and meta. So in terms of ranking them against other horror movies, it kind of makes sense and it kind of doesn't. So like, where do they like line up for you?
It's a weird thing for me because they're in a weird place because they're like they essentially single handedly revived the slasher genre when it was on its deathbed in the '90s, and it was kind of that thing where it brought new life into the slasher genre, and yet it
Hmm.
also kind of bastardized it by no fault of its own. Because after Scream,
Right.
there were so many imitators of Scream that were less successful. From the I Know What You Did Last Summer movies, Cherry Falls, just a ton, and not to mention all the parodies like Scary Movie, Shriek, If You Know What I Did Last Friday the 13th. Um,
Yeah, I've actually seen I Know What You Did Last Summer back a few years ago, maybe several years at this point,
one
which is
thing,
probably one of the better imitators as far as I've heard.
yeah, I remember enjoying as a kid. I remember reading the book in the sixth grade, and one of my favorite things about that knockoff is that they both have Sarah Michelle Gellar, Scream 2, as well as that movie. And
That's true.
that's always a good thing to have her involved. But where it ranks for me, I mean, it's odd because Scream really isn't. I think it's one of the more consistent series. I think very highly of
Hmm.
it. I enjoy them a lot. I don't watch them nearly as much as nearly any other horror series. It's not necessarily one of my favorites, but yet it kind of is. Um, I really like them, but if I had to like pick ride or dies, Scream would not be on my list.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't really hold in regard to like my favorite scary movies because Scream doesn't scare me at all. We just had a movie night. We're recording this the night before Halloween. We just had a movie night with my brother, his girlfriend, and one of our other friends, and Colton and I. And it was the first time Colton had watched Scream 1. And I mean, he was just straight up bursting out laughing at a lot of the physical comedy of it and of Ghostface and the killer getting beat around by doors and tripping downstairs and stuff. I mean, there's a real like there's something there for everybody kind of entertainment quality to these movies that I also think not a lot of horror movies have at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's really underrated as oddly enough. I mean, of course, it's a '90s time capsule kind of movie, but it's underrated in the
Oh
sense
yeah.
that it has such massive crossover appeal, where even people who don't like horror movies like Scream. And the reason why, in my opinion, is the writing, the directing, and the cast. And that is what brings me back to these movies when I watch them. Uh,
Yes.
that's what made them last, is that it's just a true, like, group effort with all these very talented individuals coming back for each movie, even the less successful ones. And there's just such a charm about it, and you actually care about the characters. You want to see where they go next. You watch the next movie so that you see who's going to make it out or who doesn't, and you want people to live. And you enjoy the character interactions. You enjoy the dialogue. Of course, Wes Craven's very good director when he's at his best, and he's at his best for a lot of these movies. I think there's a lot of highlights of his career in them.
Right, and I think some of what makes the character and dialogue so good is that are so intently aware of the tropes of what their lives are becoming. I mean, because every other horror movie essentially exists in this universe except for the one that they're obviously in, which even that, we get into weird territory there with the third film, which we'll get to in particular. But just it has a very clear mindset for how meta it wants to be and how that like fuels the overall story and tone of each movie.
Definitely. And I'm glad you said the word tone, because I was just about to bring that up. There's a very unique tone to these films that, for me personally, I think is the perfect middle ground between like almost like Dawson's Creek versus Friday the 13th.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that. It has that teenage weirdness flair to it that I don't know of how many other things have it. It's funny because with my brother and those of us who have watched the movie a lot, we explain it to new people. We almost say, this basically is Scooby-Doo with blood. I mean, this is a mystery at its core, but it's also a bunch of teenagers running around being doofuses. And that's only further bolstered in the fourth wall by the fact that Matthew Lillard and Sarah Michelle Gellar are in Scream well.
Yeah, exactly. And I know particularly the second, which we'll get to soon enough as well, that's always kind of written off as being too Scooby-Doo for some people. And personally, I mean, maybe it's my age or just my personal taste, but I love that about the movie. I think the whodunit
me too.
factor.
That's why I'm here for it, honestly. That's kind of why I rewatch these movies. They are just very, kind of like entertaining as a cartoon would be in some ways.
Yeah, and the whodunit factor is such a major draw. And yeah, like you have like your Shaggy and your Velma, so to speak. The recurring characters, I guess you just the mystery gang at large, who are in pretty much every movie after the first, and that's the thing is like I heard it just said recently where most slasher franchises of old, the villain would return every movie, so you would watch them to see the villain. And Scream is very different because it has the heroes return every movie, and they have a new villain each time. And I never considered that, but I think that is a major thing that makes Scream unique.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it, actually. Because, yeah, you're so used to some of the other classic slashers of, there might be one person who survives the entire movie or everybody dies. Whereas in Scream, it's almost kind of embarrassing how many main characters like get off scot-free. It's actually kind of funny. There might be like maybe like a couple reoccurring characters that bite the dust by the end of the saga of 4 movies, but even for the most part, your main characters last, which is also kind of refreshing, I think, because people expect, maybe even subconsciously, every main character is going to die, at least if not this movie, then in the sequel.
Yeah, and honestly, at this point in the series, and they're making another one, and personally, I just don't give a shit. It might be good. I mean, the people behind it are talented. You got the guy who wrote Zodiac working on it. But without Wes Craven, without Kevin Williamson, I'm just not personally interested. Now, if I see a trailer and it looks great, then I'll probably go see it. But there's nothing drawing me in right now to that project. And a lot of people are like, they always want the main characters to die one of them, and I kind of get it because they do have that plot armor, but I just don't care. Like, do I want to see Sydney Prescott get her throat slit, or do I want to see, Gail Weathers get killed and then Dewey's a widow, or vice versa? Not really. I'm kind of happy with the the characters' states at the end of the third movie and the fourth movie. Um, I just I'm perfectly fine ending it with the fourth, even though I think uh, it could have been handled better in some ways by the Weinsteins, who were meddling quite a bit with that movie.
Right. I mean, I agree with you. I have no excitement levels for it because the identity of the directing and the writing is either past or it's not coming back. But yeah, I don't really know what it would even be like. Scream 4 felt like an ending in a lot of ways, just because of like the generation gap and how it seemed to wrap things up in a majority of ways. I don't really know what they would do, but um, I'm not so against it that I wouldn't see it if it looks good, I suppose. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But at this point, we can kind of break down each movie individually if you want to do that.
Yeah, that sounds good, and there's no better place to begin than the most iconic scene in the entire series, which is the opening to the first film.
Yeah, exactly. My brother said that exact thing when the scene finished, when we just finished watching it tonight. My brother, to his girlfriend, who had never seen a horror movie ever, Scream tonight was her first, and she was pretty scared actually. And and my brother was like, "All right, don't worry, you've made it through the most horrifying part in the entire saga."
Yeah, it's pretty true. And one thing that she might not have picked up on, or audience today may not know, is the film was largely advertised with Drew Barrymore top billed in the cast, and
Right.
making it seem as though she would be the final girl. And this is, of course, a callback to Psycho with Janet Leigh's character. That, oddly enough, there's so many interesting things where it feels like Kevin Williamson and Wes Craven had this artistic marriage where they're just on the same page about so much while having their various focuses. It's like they had the same major but had different focuses in college, but they just always were kind of on the same page, it felt like. Particularly the scene where Wes Craven had already given homage to it in A Nightmare on Elm Street, which was a screenplay he wrote himself and of course directed. And here we have it again with another character getting the same fate, although much sooner into the film, with Drew Barrymore's character. And there's so many odes to Hitchcock in the opening, particularly the most notable being the popcorn, the kettle popcorn that is just getting larger and larger. So this tension's being created with the audience, even outside of the stalking and the harassing.
Right. I mean, the only fatality in this scene that matters is the popcorn. Am I right?
Yeah, exactly. Which is interesting too, because of all things, she's not burning her pot roast; she's burning popcorn, which is kind of meta in and of itself.
I mean, everything about this scene is really iconic, and it really is. It's almost kind of a ruse, honestly. I mean, when you look at all of the movies, and 95% of the time they're in this really campy yet somewhat scary territory. But the first like 10 minutes of the first film is really not like that at all. I mean, the dialogue is quippy, of course, but you know, these are like teenagers kind of like being assholes and then being scary or scared by each other. So it doesn't really have that tone until after the main kill of her character.
Yeah, and one thing that I think it handles very well, I think the series handles very well, is that it is postmodern. It does have the hip teenagers who have seen horror movies before. They make references to other horror movies that we, the audience, have seen. Drew Barrymore's character seems smart. She seems like a real, maybe even a slightly idealized, a movie, quote unquote, realistic teenager who's a little soft around the edges than a real teenager might be. She doesn't have acne or say with every sentence like I as an almost 30-year-old man do. But the thing is that she's savvy, she's smart, she's clever, but then they know just when to make things real and escalate them. When Ghostface says into the phone something on the lines of, I'm going to gut you like a fish, and I think the word fuck is used by the killer. And it's almost like a switch is turned, where it's a little bit playful and she's going along with the call, thinking it's a prank call. And then all of a sudden, it's like that gut dropping moment where like, oh, this shit's real. And I think it communicates so well to the audience where when that happens, you're like watching, like, it's a fun slasher movie, but then that happens, like, oh, there's real danger here. This is actually kind of a bit edgier and different than just Friday the 13th, where it's kind of just goofy.
Right. Worse than some of those older movies, some of which Wes Craven also directed. Danger just kind of presents itself. And, a lot of our iconic killers that they reference a lot in this movie in particular are like supernatural forces of evil or like unstoppable, seemingly mythical serial killers. And then Ghostface has that edge, obviously, because the killers are also teenagers. So they have that like impulsive rage. It also helps explain why they are not supervillains and they are kind of pussies.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things that the first film I don't think gets enough credit for today as it should, where it was made there's almost like 2 points in pop culture up until this whole pre 9/11 90s era, where I would say Scream 1 and 2 are pre-Columbine and Scream 3 is post-Columbine, essentially. What is post-Columbine, but I think it went in production like a few weeks or a month after Columbine or something, and it really affected the violence in the film and a lot of the tone of the film. And the thing that is really great about Scream is that there was this whole war with censorship, especially in horror genre. And you could tell that it was probably very cathartic for Wes Craven as a director, especially with some lines like, what is it? Horror movies don't make killers; they make killers more creative. And
I love that line.
This whole idea, and it's really broken down, especially in the second film, a little bit more too, where the media doesn't create violence. Films are just films, and there's a real partition there between the meta commentary and the real violence. The characters aren't winking at the camera or making quips as they die. They're just fucking dying. And the violence is always treated with this groundedness that weighs down on the characters. Right. It knows when to be serious and when to joke. And that's when a good horror comedy is when the characters take the movie seriously.
Right. Exactly. I mean, they're definitely like amping it up all the way until they're like actually in life and death scenarios. And I think Sydney as a character always really reminds you of that whenever she's in danger, because she, the actress, is really good at acting like she is in danger. Neve Campbell, right?
Yeah, Neve Campbell. I almost just called her by her character.
Really good at acting. Right. Right.
Well, I mean, I'll say this, and I think this is probably the most vanilla opinion ever, but Sidney Prescott is probably the best protagonist in all of horror.
Yeah, no, she's awesome. I'm always cheering for her because it's certainly not a Mary Sue, but she always makes seemingly common sense, logical, no fucks given kind of decisions. And then she lasts throughout the movies because of them. I think is very cathartic. There's always like that last girl trope, and that's certainly not new. But I think the way in which they do it in these movies is still different.
Yeah, and we'll have to track that as we go through the movies, because I think that development's very interesting. And one of the best parts about this series that makes it rewarding, not just to watch one movie, but to marathon them or watch them all. But in
Right.
this film, she is a high school student. She is, as of this point, not a survivor of any murder sprees yet. Um, Her mother, however, was killed, and the suspect who is believed to have killed her, Cotton Weary, is in
Mm.
prison for her murder. And she goes to school with Rose McGowan and Matthew Lillard, and a guy who's a kind of a Johnny Depp of the time look-alike, whose name I always forget and can never pronounce.
Yeah, he is.
And the Fonz is their principal.
You're damn right. Brother's girlfriend, she was actually most horrified at him getting the knife partway through.
I had to bring that scene up because there's that cameo by Wes Craven as a janitor, basically dressed up as Freddy Krueger, who I believe is even
Right.
referred to as Fred by the Fonz immediately before he's killed.
He is. Yeah, he is. It's a beautiful Easter egg.
Yeah, it's just so on the nose and just so blatant, but I love it for that. I will say, one issue I do have with this movie is that when he dies, when the principal dies, I think it's just kind of thrown in there. I don't know that we needed to see him die, other than the fact that we needed another death. And the only excuse I can really give for it is that a teenager may. I'm going to put myself carefully here. Um, I could see a teenager that would go around killing people go for the principal.
Right. And then later, like 30, 40 minutes later, his death is used as the plot device to get all of the other random teenagers out of the house so that the final act can like truly start.
Okay. Okay, I forgot about
So
that part.
I think they probably planted his death. Maybe the first priority was as a plot device, just so that they could say, "Oh, the rest of the teenagers are left for some reason."
That makes sense. That and another issue of this movie. It's just a silly movie thing. It's basically nitpick, but when Ghostface is in the grocery store with Sydney chasing her, it's just such a silly thing to go in full costume and chase her and try to kill her in the fucking grocery store.
I think your audio cut off.
Oh, I think yours as well. I'll just repeat myself. I said I think it's always so funny the idea of Ghostface chasing Sydney through the grocery store in that one scene.
Oh, right. I know. It's such a like a throwaway scene too.
Exactly. They're little things, but for a film that's so clever and such a tight script for the most part, those flimsy parts really stand out.
Right. It's actually closer, to 2 hours than not. And it's paced very well because it never feels like it's almost a 2 hour movie to me.
Yeah, and it's pretty rare for horror movies to be that long. They're usually on the slimmer side, sometimes just hardly an hour and a half. And that's one thing I love about the genre, but
Right.
especially slashers. I mean, they're fun. They're basically date night movies. They're popcorn flicks. With that said, I think Scream really benefits from the runtime because you need to get to know the characters. You need to get to know the mystery. Even the town is such a character in the
Yes.
film.
No, I think kind of establishing the setting and just the surroundings of all the little supporting characters is more important, especially since you are following several of them across many films. The runtime is justified, wherein perhaps some other horror movies, shouldn't have such a runtime.
Exactly. And this was always pitched as a trilogy. From the start, Craven and Williamson were signed on for a 3-picture deal if the first was successful.
Right. Which of course it was. Um, yeah, there's just some really creative moments and kills. The one girl in the garage door, can never forget that. And just the whole sequence of reveal of there being two killers, which makes a lot of sense. And I wonder, I bet a lot of people maybe see it coming. I think that is a really nice way to establish 4 movie series as well, because then for every subsequent movie, not only could it be a new killer, also, it could be 2 new killers, which of course they work off of that in the future more than once.
Exactly, and I think at the time it's very clever because for the first film particularly, it's clever because there's always that thing where Jason's everywhere. He always catches up to the victim. They're running one in the forest, and he's way behind them walking. They're running and sprinting, doing a marathon, and then all of a sudden, they get to the cabin, but Jason's already in the cabin, and it's ridiculous.
Right.
Same with Michael Myers and all that, and Freddy, of course, makes sense because he's a dream creature. But in Scream, you just think, oh, what's the typical horror movie thing? But with there being 2 of them, all of a sudden, it's very logical.
Exactly. It's a lot more grounded, so it has to make sense in that way.
And I think I forgot to give enough credit to Jamie Kennedy as Randy Meeks, who is debatably the best character in the series.
No, he's definitely the crux of all the fourth wall humor, the dissection that makes these movies seem smarter and funnier than they would be without it.
Definitely. I think he's great, and of course he survives the first film, and then you get Dewey and Gale. You get David Arquette and Courtney Cox, who are married in real life and met in these films. So that's kind of an interesting trivia. But for me, I mean, I love Randy, I love Sidney, but at the end of the day, I'm a Dewey guy.
Yeah, Colton was laughing over him in a good way. And this was his first time watching the movie. There's just a lot of likable characters. They all get great one-liners. They all get great scenes and interactions with each other. Whereas in a lot of horror franchises, perhaps characters, for the most part, other than your protagonist, can seem very dispensable, which you don't feel that way in these movies, which is why when any of the main characters are in danger, you feel like there's stakes more than just at the end, for example.
Definitely, and I think that's what makes Scream Scream. That's what's made it lasting. I think there's a reason that they had to 2 seasons in recalibrate the Scream TV show, and then I think it just got canceled. I think people watch it for these characters at this point. And speaking of the TV show, one thing I'm going to bring up is the iconic mask, which was changed for the first few seasons of the show. I've never seen the show. I don't give a fuck about the show. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. I just didn't watch it. It just didn't interest me. However, the iconic mask is inspired by that mask, the Scream. I forget who did that now, which makes me seem kind of uncultured. But everybody knows which one I'm talking about.
Right, the painting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the TV show changed that, and it changed the identity of a lot of things. Since my brother is a Scream super fan, he tried watching the TV show for a bit, but I just don't think it really grabbed him in the same way the movies did, at all. So it definitely seemed like it was going for a completely different image.
Yeah, and also I'm okay with that. I would be more interested in a total Scream reboot, so to speak, than for another film with the returning trio.
Yeah, maybe they can call it Stab, dude. Don't they call the fictional movies in the movies Stab?
They do, and they're directed in universe by Robert Rodriguez, who actually shot the footage of the Stab movie in Scream 2.
Beautiful.
So, wrapping up this first one, I mean, the climax at the party is just full of great classic stuff, where you get, first of all, you get the final girl losing her virginity, which breaks the mold of typical slasher films, which is worth noting. Then, of course, you get Matthew Lillard just acting his butt off.
Oh yeah, he's freaking wild.
And
Shaggy is just lost his marbles.
yeah, and he gets probably one of the best deaths in a slasher film with the getting his head crushed by the TV, which is a pretty on the nose remark about his character.
It is. It's a good way to go out. You know, if you had to choose a death, that's a pretty fantastic one to go, and maybe it's pretty painless compared to getting shot and stabbed. Who knows?
Yeah, I always wanted to die from like, having sex with Emma Roberts to death or something. But I guess like getting smashed by a TV, I'd settle for that.
There's trade-offs to each, of course.
Yeah. So anyhow, you get the great speech by Randy talking about the tropes of horror films and the whole "don't say I'm going to be right back because you won't" and all that.
Right.
And the one last jump scare where he just gets fucking shot as he's getting back up.
Oh yeah, and then Courtney Cox's character is very proud of the fact that she learned how to use the gun the second time.
So for me personally, I think that wraps it up for Scream 1.
Right. What would you give Scream as a rating?
It's really hard because I'm going to say, for me personally, I'm going to go 9.5 out of 10. Depending on my mood, I could give it a 10. But today, I'm just overthinking it, thinking a lot about the series, meditating on it. And it's just, there's just little parts that are just a little wonky.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's not quite airtight, but it's really, really great. It's iconic. The characters are arguably the best in any slasher movie. The direction's great. The kills, the opening sequence, the music, the crane shots that are iconic for the series. It's basically, if it is not a perfect movie, worst case scenario, it's as close to you get to being a perfect movie without being a perfect movie.
Right. I think I would give it a 9. It's definitely earned its classic status. And I think as more time passes, it still remains like classic for a reason. I think people still enjoy going back to it or still going to watch it for the first time. And it's kind of crazy to think that it's 24 years old at this point.
Yeah, and I feel it's been vindicated because there's a lot of backlash towards Scream in the day. On horror communities that I personally even saw that, I'm obviously a little bit too young to experience too much of it, but it was the thing, like, oh, Scream, that made the slasher genre into this teeny bopper thing and all that. And, its influence did, but you can't blame Jaws for every bad shark movie. Jaws is still Jaws. Right. And at this point, I think we can safely say, yes, there was a lot of bad imitators of Scream, but Scream stood the test of time. It wasn't a fluke.
Absolutely.
It's
definitely unfair to blame one piece of art for like ripple effect that maybe isn't as good. Thankfully, Scream is also a horror movie that has good sequels, in my opinion. So, Scream 2, we touched on it a bit earlier. For me, it just kind of ups the ante of two of the things that I like. First one, I like even more in the second one. It is kind of like that more of a Scooby-Doo mystery flair. It goes even harder meta because instead of just comparing the situation to horror films, you can also compare the situations, the sequel, to what happened in the original, which to the characters is just real life. So there's just a lot that they get away with in terms of story and writing that is just super entertaining, and the college setting is just a blast. It's funny. Exactly. I think it's way funnier than the high school setting.
I agree. The campus setting is a lot of fun. I think it's a natural continuation for obvious reasons. I think that the opening sequence, and there's issues with this movie. I really, on a viewing level, I probably enjoy Scream 2 as much as I do Scream 1. However, as a film, it's not nearly as strong. As far as being a sequel goes, especially a Rush sequel that came out roughly a year after the first, I think it is impeccable. I
Yeah,
think
that's a
it's
good point.
so much fun. I think it advances the theme so well. And to start with the opening scene, how do you top the opening scene of the first movie? And actually, I want to go back to that real quick while it's on my mind. One of the best things about that film, what it does is that the teenagers feel like teenagers, not movie characters. And the best way they do this, that's so clever, is that when you see Drew Barrymore get murdered at the beginning of the film, she's murdered in front of her parents, and you see her parents' concern. In Friday the 13th, you didn't see the camp counselor's parents grieving. In Halloween series, you do a little bit, actually. But I think in this film as well, especially with the returning characters, you're scared when you see Dewey get stabbed in the soundstage in that soundproof room. You're scared when Randy gets pulled into the van.
Right. Yes. No, they do that very well. Jada Pinkett Smith is the first death in this movie, correct?
Yeah, that's true. And I love the death sequence in this. I think it's campy. I will not lie. It is campy. It is logically doesn't make much sense, which is kind of my issue with most of this movie. Is when you think too much about it without using movie logic, a lot of the structure kind of falls apart, unfortunately. But as a matinee, it's a blast. And I think that is summed up so well in the opening sequence where her boyfriend gets killed, and then she gets killed, and she goes out in front of the movie screen as Stab is playing with Heather Graham playing a version of Nev Campbell's character in the film, which is given a different name in the Stab series. So it's like twice as meta right now. We're watching the character die in front of the opening sequence, essentially, of the first film. And it's just so over the top. It's ridiculous. And I just love it. I think it's great.
Sequence of the first movie where it kind of is that ruse and throws you off guard and tries to prepare you. This one very much right off the bat tells you how over the top it is going to be early on, which I think definitely helps to set expectations, a bit differently compared to the first.
Exactly, and it's much more overt where, of course, you're opening the film with the opening of a film with the character getting killed in front of the screen, and the climax of the film takes place on a stage where a play is being put on, which I believe the play is Agamemnon. I can never pronounce it. Agamemnon, I believe it's pronounced. I've read it, I don't really know how it connects to the film, as far as I recall. Wes Craven, he was a professor, I believe, of psychology, and so all of his films have these things like the red and green sweater for Freddy being the most visually striking colors, and the claw because that's one of mankind's most primal fears, like an animal claw that could attack you. So he's always got shit like that in it, and I think it was the film goes a little too far in that direction for some people, where there's a scene where Sydney's being talked to by her I think the director of the play that she's in, she's an actress now, which doesn't really bother me. It's a little weird, but whatever. And it's just so meta, and the commentary's laid on so thick that it rubs people the wrong way. I get it. For me as a viewer, doesn't bother me one bit.
Right, and to me, again, that factor is what entertains me the most, and it's what keeps me coming back to these movies at least every other year or so.
Exactly. And before we get to them getting killed off, I want to talk about the cast, because it's a wild one yet again, because we got let's see, the one that really gets me, we got Sarah Michelle Gellar, which I mentioned earlier, of course. We get Timothy Olyphant in it, as well as Jerry O'Connell. And that always just cracks me up seeing them. Oh, and Luke Wilson's in this one. I saw it on IMDb. I thought it was a third that he showed up in, but I think he's the killer, Billy, from the first one in the Stab movie, and a scene from the movie, and just seeing a young Luke Wilson in a Scream movie cracks me up so much.
So they go all out with the different castings of characters. I just always end up feeling bad for Cindy's boyfriend in this movie, because you're kind of led to believe for a little bit that he might be bad and that this is kind of happening to her all over again. But he really just liked her and just bites the bullet. It kind of sucks.
It totally does. He even gives one of the cheesiest scene in the entire series, arguably, when he fucking sings to her in the cafeteria and gives her his Greek letter necklace or whatever the hell.
Oh my god. I live for that shit, dude. Like, I know some people, they might have this line that they draw in the sand where it's like, okay, you can be cheesy, but just not too cheesy. And for me, with these movies, like, that line does not exist. It is not drawn in the sand whatsoever. So I just live for that shit.
I pretty much agree. I think the line's drawn somewhere in Scream 3. I would say Jay and Silent Bob showing up for a cameo is past that line for me.
Right. And I think it's not because of the commitment to cheesiness or humor in 3 that puts me off. It's more just doesn't seem like it's there for a reason, or it's well written.
Yeah. One fascinating thing for me, though, without getting too far into the third, because we're going to talk about the second a bit more, of course, is that we get that shitty cameo with Jay and Silent Bob in the third movie, this third Scream movie. But in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, Wes Craven has a cameo where they show up on the set of a Scream movie, and the Ghostface killer's chasing a girl, and then she pulls a mask off, and it's the monkey that Jay and Silent Bob are looking for throughout the movie. And someone says, a monkey? And Wes Craven's like, people love monkeys. And that is a great cameo.
I did not know about that. That's ridiculous.
So it's weird that they kind of cross over in those two movies.
It's the same universe.
Yeah, so going back to the second. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, my point's finished.
I was going to say, going back to the second, one thing we have to discuss is the unfortunate demise of Randy Meeks.
Yeah, it's definitely a bummer. Scream 2 definitely turns up the dial on bummer deaths, because you're not really attached to anyone to too much of an extent in the first film. So even if they had killed off Dewey instead of almost doing it, it wouldn't have been that bad. So Scream 2, I think, benefits in that way as a sequel, like many sequels do, where the stakes are just higher because of the audience's connection to the character.
Exactly. And Dewey was supposed to die in the first one. He was scripted to, but he was spared. And in the second, some more people were supposed to die as well. I hate to say it, I think killing off Randy Meeks was probably a decent idea to raise the stakes, because I'm happy with where the other characters wound up in the series. I get where, like, the only place to take Randy really would have been either A, him continuously getting cucked by Sydney every movie, or B, becoming her love interest. And I feel like either one of those probably would not have been that interesting.
Right. And doesn't he even, like, remark on those facts, or kind of something to that effect, where he's got that videotape and he's like, yeah, I'm probably dead. The narrative structure just worked in such a way that this makes sense.
Yeah, and I don't know if people like or hate that part of Scream 3. I actually like it. I think it's a great way to incorporate that character in.
Yeah, to me, it's kind of a brighter spot in Scream 3. And I forget that tape is in Scream 3, but yeah, you're right. Seems to be in character, though, at least.
Yeah, I buy that character would do that. And I almost wish they would have had his character be, or his sister character have been in more of Scream 3 to be more of a player. She even could have been the killer. I wouldn't have given a shit. I would have been fine with that. But going back to Scream 2, yeah, I definitely feel bad when the characters die in this one. Like you said, the boyfriend death. And for me, what's so traumatizing about that is that the killer, Timothy Olyphant's character, basically is manipulating Sydney and her trust issues, so that not only you, the audience, are asking, like, is he the killer? Because he's tied up at that point. He's basically been hazed, essentially, and tied up on stage by his fraternity brothers and left there. And so he's been, he's helpless, and Sydney is basically being manipulated, like, to say, like, do you trust him? Do you really think he's innocent? And she doesn't know. So then when he does die and he's innocent, he's kind of doubly betrayed, not only by being murdered, but by having not been trusted after all the steps he's taken to prove himself to Sydney.
No, it's very well executed in that way, and I just really love the finale, probably the most of Scream 2 of all four movies. I'm not sure what it is. They obviously do the two killers thing again, and Billy's crazy mom is a very, very excellent character to watch. I mean, she's like to the nth degree crazier, it seems, and all the like stunt work that they do around the stage and the sets, really creative as well.
I agree, and it's so funny because, like, they just take the Friday the 13th twist of, oh, it's not Jason, it's his mother who's upset that Jason was drowned. You know, she's grieving her dead son killing people that she blames for it. It's just that, without really much of a twist. And the ending is pretty goofy when you think about it. I was even watching it today, just to recap, even though this movie's very fresh in my mind, just being a favorite of mine. And it's goofy when you break it down, like, so much. Like, for instance, so Gail just happens to go to Sydney's college because she wants Sydney to do an interview with Cotton, where they reunite. And then it just happens to be the time where there's a murder. So Dewey happens to be there. So the characters all happen to be getting together at the same place. And some of it, like the killer choosing to do this with Sydney being there. And of course, when we find out who the killers are and their connection, it makes sense. But it's just so convenient for plot. It's so kind of convoluted. And it just works. It's just fun.
I think all four movies have a lot of that, though, to certain extents. Like, you know, in the finale of the first movie, it's like, oh, we thought Courtney Cox had crashed the van, but no, she came back just in time to save the day. And certain things, you know, some are easier to swallow than others, but it's like, for this kind of movie, I just don't really mind convenience at all, to be honest, which seems like it's giving it a pass, but I don't know.
I know what you mean, and it seems like the movies are self-aware in a sense where it's almost celebrating those tropes to a certain extent too. Like, for instance, one of my favorite gags in Scream 2 is when Timothy Olyphant's character saying, like, there's another killer coming right up or something like that, and then the first person you see walk through the door is Gail, and you're like, oh my god, it's Gail. And then immediately after that, you see the mother walking out, Billy's mother, holding her at gunpoint right after her. And little things like that, it just really works for me. And I don't know, I can just excuse it, especially for a slasher movie.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, so honestly, I would give Scream 2 a 9, right up there with the original.
I definitely agree. I want to go 9. I'm going to go, and usually I would go 9, but sorry. Sorry.
God bless you.
Thank you. I don't know if that showed up or not. I wanted to make it show up so it would make sense for the listeners why that just happened. But anyhow, usually most days I would give Scream 2 like a 9, 9.5, or there's Scream 1. I'm just feeling a little critical today. I'm just in one of those moods where I want to knock shit down. Unfortunately, it's
Yeah.
usually the opposite. So I'm going to give Scream 2 an 8.5 to 9, where it's kind of in between, just
Beautiful.
like Scream 1 was 9.5 or 10.
That's fair. Yeah, it's just for what it perhaps lacks in the technical execution that may be better in the first film. It just has those extra stakes and that kind of that extra cheese that holds up the entertainment factor. But now moving on to Scream 3, definitely the black sheep of the franchise, definitely the wonkiest film, I think, is probably near unanimous thing to say about this movie. What do you think about this one?
The best way I can sum up my thoughts on this movie is my viewing experience with this movie, where most times having seen the movie, it was just playing on TV. I turn on HBO or whatever, and it'd be playing, and I catch maybe the second half of it or the first half of it. And I feel like Scream 3 is the kind of movie where if you're bored, you're home and just flipping through the channels, oh, Scream 3's on. I think it's a fun watch in that regard. I don't think it's
Hmm.
anything more than that. A decent way to spend the time. I think I'm much more forgiving of a lot of it than most people, but it is by far the worst Scream movie. It is not a particularly good movie. I've got major issues with it, but I still think it goes down. It's kind of like taking a shot that's a little bit bitter, but it
Yeah.
does get you tipsy and you can down it.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that as well. We're probably not going to dwell on this movie too long because some of the plot's still fuzzy. I haven't rewatched this one in at least a couple of years. Um, this is the point in which it goes too hard, too fourth wall breaking, and just kind of it's not like they do it for the absolute cheese and hokey entertainment. It just feels like actual movie makers behind the scenes, just like the movie makers that are characters in this movie, all just don't have good ideas or they're running out of ideas. I mean, there's definitely some creative things here and there in this movie, and it's not like a complete betrayal of the character, like Sydney and other characters are kind of poorly used in this movie, and just the whole way they try to flip the lore on its head, just bizarre as well. And I feel like every time I watch the end of this movie, I'm like relearning the lore of Sydney's parents and shit. It's just a big pill to swallow. It's just a weird. I mean, this is where they ended the franchise for a while too. It just didn't feel like it was ever the ending this series deserved.
Yeah, so to give some behind the scenes on this, because I think it's very necessary for this film, particularly out of any in this franchise. There was major issues after Scream 2, where the first was very successful, the second was wildly successful for being the kind of sequel that it was, and so they want to do the third. However, the first movie was so successful that the core players could not work their schedules out because their careers all skyrocketed. So Kevin Williamson and Nev Campbell, particularly, were the two that just could not find an opening where they could each be available, which is a little bit weird to me just because I don't know, because him being the writer you would think wouldn't need to line up with hers, but I'm sure it's if you looked at it, it's a little more complex, but it would make sense in some
Right.
way. Maybe he had to finish up some other commitment and she had to film before another of her commitments, kind of deal. But regardless, that was kind of the rock in the hard place. So Williamson stepped down so that she could be in the movie. And Aaron Krueger, I believe it was, that was hired to write this one. Yes, Aaron Krueger. And he read the scripts for the first three. He watched them. And Wes Craven kind of coached him to help him write it. But ultimately, he's no Kevin Williamson. And I think he tried. That's the thing I was thinking about today that's so heartbreaking, is that I think everybody involved wanted to make a good movie. I think everybody involved cared deeply about the success of this movie, and that's where it kind of does
Right.
shine. And I think, honestly, and this is where I'm more lenient, I think there are a lot of good ideas in this movie that are not executed that well. And before I get to that, the original pitch for this movie was wildly different with Williamson. He wanted in Scream 2 to kill everyone. He wanted Dewey and Gale to die, and then what's his name? Cotton. Yeah, Cotton. I kept thinking Courtney because of Courtney Cox. Cotton
Right.
and Cotton and Sydney kill each other. I don't quite understand. I've never read that script. I don't even know if it's available. But that is, to my understanding, what was supposed to end Scream 2. And Scream 3 was supposed to be the world affected by the murders, without any recurring characters, which is much more theme heavy than plot heavy.
Right.
And that was, I think that was his plan the whole time. And maybe
Chris, in the actual movie we got, it was obviously still the same cast of characters, but just kind of reenacting their lives or the thematic effects on the hypersensitization of what they've been through, because they're making movies based off of it, which does lend itself to some creative, like, fight and flight scenarios. Like, I do, like the scene with the killer chasing Sydney through a model of her old house. Like, that's a pretty cool idea. There are definitely some good ideas here, but they just never really feel like they're connected, part of like a larger movie very well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think the movie within a movie stuff is really taken to the nth degree here, and I'm okay with that. I actually, it's cheesy. It is totally like 80s movie cheese. Even though, of course, this film was not made in the 80s. It was actually made in 2000, but it
Right.
the scene where the killer's like faxing a script about what's happening, and the guy goes in to read it, and the part that's stupid is he starts to later read it when he could read a little bit of it at first. And the house blows up because it's filled with gas. He would, of course, smell the gas, but in a turn your brain off kind of way, I do kind of have fun with it.
Oh, right. Like, this movie isn't a dumpster fire by any stretch, and it's definitely got, creative skills here and there, some interesting character work. I don't know if I can call it exciting character work. Again, because kind of the plot is just very convoluted too. I mean, of the four movies, it's got the most convoluted, like, history and everything. So that's kind of hard to swallow as well. Um, I mean, it's still not a movie that I like omit from existence, from a canon. It's like, if I'm gonna watch the Scream movies, yeah, I'll watch all four. I'll sit through three. Like, I won't grumble about it too much.
Yeah, I feel like there's just enough fun to be had with it that, like, I wouldn't watch it on its own, but if I'm watching the others, I'll watch it. And, like, the one thing that hurts it is that it has the weakest side characters. Nev Campbell, even though she is in the movie, she's not in nearly as much of it as the first two, and that hurts it a lot.
Right.
Now, when she's in it, it might be some of the best stuff you see. Her actually fighting the end killer is a really brutal, great sequence, and seeing her character further develop is great. I think her being kind of was a crisis center kind of person, a call center kind of deal, I think is a great choice for her character. That's shows her maturing into the professional world.
Right.
Nev Campbell's always great, but it's just once again, despite everybody's best efforts, it's just not quite enough for the film. One thing that really hurts it for me is that the film's really cut down. I hear this is why the comedy's so strong. Is it goes that post Columbine thing, where the studios didn't want a gory movie with brutal deaths. They didn't want a dark movie, so you get a lot of stabbings. And I will say the one death that gets me is the one where the guy's running on the rug and Ghostface pulls the rug and he like does this almost like a flip landing on his neck and he gets thrown off a 2-story building after that. But that land is so great and gets me every time.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, all the like set within the sets work that they do, which I guess I would consider that an example, is pretty fun to watch. I mean, so overall, this movie is entertaining. I mean, maybe if I'm feeling generous, I give it like a 6, I guess.
Yeah, one thing I have to say for the movie is that, as far as being a trilogy capper, even though it's the weakest of the series by far, I do like where all the characters end up at the end of it, with Dewey and Gale being engaged, and they're all there. It's a happy ending, and that always kind of does give it a cherry on top for me, where it's a pleasant ending, and I'm happy if we never saw those characters again after that point, and that really softens the blow for me. I think there's some fun jokes. It is indulgent. It is a little bit too meta for its own good. Ultimately, I would give it probably like, I'm going to say a 7.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Again, I'm fine with everything being meta as well. But like you said, I think it's so meta that for me, it kind of gets in the way of like good storytelling to a certain degree. I guess anything else that you have to say about Scream 3 before we get into the final installment?
Yeah, I think the best way to sum up Scream 3 is that it has pretty much everything you say that's the worst of in the series belongs to Scream 3. And if you want to talk about the best of anything in the series, none of it's in Scream 3. And we didn't bring up the voice changer that can mimic anyone's voice, which is preposterous and silly.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's very convenient.
I don't really give a shit. It doesn't bother me like it does other people. It's a stupid movie technology, but it is weird and worth mentioning.
Yeah, I forgot it existed until you just mentioned it.
I'm sorry to remind you. You're probably better off.
I was. Well, going into Scream 4, I feel like this is probably maybe the most divisive movie for Scream fans, but I actually like Scream 4 a lot. I waffle back and forth on what my favorite is of the franchise, and I think 1 and 2 are still probably the best. But 4 is very entertaining and a very good step for kind of like that modern adaptation, because basically this was like 10, 11 years after Scream 3. I mean, so they definitely, it has a different feel to it, but a lot of the same talent has evolved, of course.
Yeah, and I really, really like Scream 4, and it makes me happy to say that. Not only is, for me personally, it'll probably be my last Scream movie. I just like I said, I may watch the 5th, but it's gonna have to show me a reason why I should. Hopefully I do, and hopefully it's a good movie, but at this point I have no plans to see it. But especially for being such a big Wes Craven fan, for this to be his last film, makes me happy, because even as one of his biggest defenders, he's got a patchy career. I mean, he's definitely got some hits and duds, and for this to be such a fun movie, does make me happy. And I can't think of a more fitting movie for him to end his career on than either a Scream or a Nightmare on Elm Street series. So I'm happy that it was this, and I do think it's a very high note. And I think because this was planned as another trilogy, they did not want it to be just another movie, and it's good that they didn't, for the sole reason that the movie bombed. I don't believe we were supposed to find out. I'm sorry, what was that?
Did you just say that it bombed at the box office?
Yeah.
Well, that's too bad. I did not know that, actually.
Yeah, I always find it kind of shocking. Like, I don't know if it was a total failure, but it was not a hit like the others were, because they were known to make bang.
It had passed, like the craze had passed, and it was not a hit like the first or second film in the 90s.
Exactly, and I believe we weren't even supposed to find who the killer was in the first film, or if we do, we find out, but they make it out, and they go on another spree. The biggest character that I think's kind of you can see this in is you get I can't pronounce her last name. The girl from Heroes, Hayden Panettiere or whatever. No offense to her. I mean, I feel bad, but I just
Hayden Panettiere,
something like that. I can never get it right. And she's
I think that's her
basically she's basically your new Randy Meeks character, and she's fun.
right.
But she gets killed off basically because she fucks up a simple bit of movie trivia that any horror fan would know.
Right. I know. I like her too. When she goes, it's a bummer.
Now she is they might even bring her back for the next movie because it's always been said that she was supposed to. It was basically a Dewey ass pull where it's like she's killed. Oh wait, no, she isn't.
Right.
But she was a fun character.
They really do fun things with this movie. I mean, I feel like they progress the character arcs further, especially for Sydney, and just to spoil the mastermind of the killer duo. Use kind of like the generational millennial obsession with being the center of attention. I found that to be a pretty clever motivation and a very fitting fourth wall breaking reveal that this whole movie is basically centered its themes around.
It's that and reboots / remakes, and we
Right.
get the final not the final line of the movie, but the final climactic line. Right before killing the new killer, Sidney says, "Don't fuck with the original." And I think that was a personal line for Wes Craven because his own film, A Nightmare on Elm Street, was remade, and they didn't allow him to have anything to do with it. And I believe he'd even reached out, and they just straight up ignored him from what he had said in interviews.
Well, that's right. Yeah.
So, the film, I mean, with the openings, we always got to talk about the openings with these, except for Scream 3, because even though one of the central characters in the series dies, it just doesn't matter. It's just boring and just not that exciting. But the fourth film, it takes the opening and the idea of a Scream opening to like the 200th degree of meta commentary, where it feels like something out of Scream 3. But yet, I think it's fun and it just works. I mean, we get a Veronica Mars cameo, so there's that.
I agree. I mean, because I think there's enough as in the real world in a decade, like the remake craze and the way the internet changed pop culture, that it's kind of earned its meta token again. Whereas I felt like the Hollywood shtick was maybe a bit too much and kind of thematically lacked creativity. I mean, it definitely led for some creative situations. But I just think they were able to get more mileage out of that because Scream 4 is a time jump.
That's very true. I think that's the issue, like you said, with Scream 3. There was more meta, but yet they had less to say about films and all that. And unfortunately, it did the thing like Spider-Man 3, where it's like, well, let's just rewrite our own mythology, which not only makes it more overly complicated for casual viewers, but it makes it less interesting for fans. And this film basically straight up ignores Scream 3, aside from Dewey and Gale being married. There really isn't that many references to it, as I recall. I don't remember a scene where it's like, remember your brother, Sidney, or anything like that.
Right.
And it moves forward, and it just kind of takes it back to its basics. And like I said, even though the opening's very, very meta, very tongue-in-cheek and cheesy, the rest of the movie, fortunately, is not that way, and I think is maybe the best balance since the first film, honestly. Totally.
Yeah. No, I think I can agree with that as well. Definitely has similarities to the first movie most. We're basically back in a high school scenario with our new young characters as well, just done with a slightly different attitude. And obviously our older legacy characters are still there and important. I would say, in terms of pacing and consistency, just like the actual details. No, it definitely makes sense that it is most like the first.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just found out that Amy Teagarden is in this, which is she's in my favorite show, Friday Night Lights, and I just never put the two together, which is great. I'm happy for her. I'm happy that she got to be in this because I was trying to find
Oh, nice.
one of Sydney's relatives. I want to make sure I get the actress's name right. Is in this. I think it's the lady from Gilmore Girls because there's a scene specifically with her that I wanted to bring up. But anyhow, there's a scene where a mother character who is a relative of Sydney's gets stabbed through the letter, the part where we put the letter through the door. I've never had one in mine, so I don't even know what they're called. But it's just such a brutal death, and it's just so, I don't know, just sad, and just seems like someone that's just innocent and good just dying. I don't know why that death's always just really affected me out of all of them in the series.
Well, I hear you. Yeah, there's definitely some more brutal deaths in this movie compared to most of the kills in the series. I mean, I think a lot of the kills in this movie really can only compare to the original kills in Scream 1. They go harder with the blood. They're not afraid to do that at this point. The one kill that really sticks with me is like when the one wisecracking police officer guy, he gets like stabbed directly in the forehead. They make a huge joke out of it too, which I don't think you'd be like cracking a joke while you were bleeding profusely from your forehead, but that's kind of, I guess, part of the humor though. But yeah, like the logistics of being stabbed in the forehead freaked me out.
Oh yeah, definitely.
For some reason.
And one thing to consider too is this film was heavily cut down too. The opening kill was originally, and this might be why they went with the opening they did. I don't know, and I don't think anybody knows that isn't involved with the movie, but it was originally like I don't even know what happened. Like a woman's hanged, it's just blood and writing on the walls. I know Wes Craven was supposed to have a cameo as I believe a coroner, and major plot points to my understanding, major themes of the movie, death scenes, a lot of that was changed by the studio. And I don't know how much was filmed. I know the different opening death was because that was if not the first, it was one of the first promotional images shared for the film, was an image that was fucking edited out of the film, which I think should be false advertising. It's just one of those films that I want a director's cut of it, or at least an assembly cut that would be closer to the original vision. It would be top 5 in my list, not just of the genre, but ever.
Yeah, I'm really impressed that for sounding like it has a lot of studio interference, this movie comes out pretty well unscathed at least.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. That's the thing that's so impressive about it, is that for a film with such major issues, I believe Kevin Williamson was even fired or just left production of the film because there was just so much tension. The fact that all that shit was going on and it's still a really good movie blows my mind. Because when I think about it, I always think it's going to be a much worse movie than it is. And every time I watch it, if you didn't tell me, or if I didn't have the foreknowledge that it did have all these issues behind the scenes, I wouldn't have guessed.
Right. Oh, it is kind of remarkable. I wonder if, I don't know, because I don't know a lot about the on the scenes here, if like the studio ended up caving on a few certain things to Wes Craven just because he's like legacy director or anything like that.
I don't know, but I would think that he probably did have more sway. For instance, it was pitched for Scream 3. I think it was even Kevin Williamson pitched it at one point to not have any on-screen deaths and not to make it like bloody or anything at all. And Wes Craven put his foot down and just said, no, we're making a Scream movie and we have certain standards for these films. If you want to make a movie with that, then you can make that movie, but don't call it Scream. And they listened.
Yeah. Oh, that's fair. I'm glad that they did.
One thing I do want to bring up for the is once again, I mean, this cast just has, or this series has such remarkably good casts. Like in this one, like I said, you get Amy Teagarden, who is an actress I've really enjoyed in the show. You get oh, I just forgot her fucking name. Alison Brie. You get her as kind of a snotty assistant to, I believe, Sydney or Gail. She's someone's assistant in the movie.
Right. Yeah, I believe it is Gail's assistant.
And you get yeah, you're right. I don't know why I was saying it was Sydney's, but then you get Emma Roberts as the slasher in this, and I think she's great. She's always, I don't know her from too much. I know her from this and a movie Jesse and Ellie or something like that. Forever.
I know
Really
her from
good.
Nickelodeon Unfabulous, so I always call her Unfabulous when she starts killing people.
Yeah, she always plays really mean girls who are like kind of like preppy and just like bully people. And she actually in real
Right.
life like bit and punched her boyfriend, who is a really good cool actor. I think Peter Evans or Evan Peters. He played Quicksilver in the X-Men movies.
Interesting.
And I don't know why, but she is just the hottest thing on earth. And the fact that she just hits men and shit just makes it worse. I can't
There's a
explain it.
lot of hot ladies in this movie. They definitely did well there.
Yeah, that's very true. And
Because you get Alison Brie, Hayden Panettiere, Emma Roberts, like it's definitely made for like 2011 or whatever generation
Kristen
of
Bell.
horny teenagers.
Yeah, exactly.
I was a horny teenager at that time, so it works out.
Yeah. So as far as Scream 4 goes, I think that's all that I personally have to say on it. I mean, I just think it's a shockingly good sequel that's not doesn't get the recognition it deserved when it came out, and it doesn't now either.
Right, I can agree with that. I'd probably give it like 8 or an 8.5. And I also want to mention that I like that you said it's shockingly good because the final kill is delivered via AED electrocution.
Yeah, I planned that. That was
Yes,
me.
exactly. I could tell, of course.
I'm gonna have to go for this one. I'm gonna say 8.5 to 9 again. I honestly have, I thought this the first time I saw it, and then the second time as well. I was lucky enough to catch it in theaters, and then catch it at home a few times. I think it's pretty much just as good as Scream 2. I think as far as Scream sequels go, I'm not saying
Yeah,
it's better, but I'm also not going to say it's worse because they both have pros and cons. But I think it's as good as you could hope for.
I can agree with that. Absolutely can agree with that. You know, it's just remarkable that for 4 movies in the horror genre, you know, for me at least, and I am not as well versed in horror as you are, there's not a whole lot of franchises that, by and large, you can say 3/4 or more is like really high quality. So it's definitely got a legacy for me in that regard.
Exactly, and that's ultimately where I stand. The series is it's not, it's not like a Nightmare on Elm Street or Phantasm where I usually watch at least one of the movies like once a year, once every other year. It's probably why I'd say I've watched the movies once every like 4 or 5 years. But it's one of the most memorable series. It's one of the most consistently enjoyable, and you really can't do much better, especially if you're a casual horror fan and want something a little bit more light in some regards. I think it really is just about as good as it gets.
Yeah, I can agree with that as well. It made for a good Halloween episode.
Yeah, so are you ready to wrap this up?
I'm ready to wrap this up, but only if I get to tear your entrails out, bro.
Well, then I guess we're gonna keep this episode going.
So, who is your favorite serial killer? And I can ask you some trivia about him or her.
My favorite serial killer is Todd Crawford.
That's funny. because my favorite serial killer is myself. Actually, it's
And we
a
are
hard tie, almost a tie, but gotta go with myself.
and
Draw.
we are two killers for the comic shop.